Okay, so let's get into some seriously unsettling stuff today. You sent over this true crime YouTube video, and it starts with this line. Imagine a world where women are held captive not for ransom, but for their eggs. Chilling, right?
Oh, it is. And what's even more unsettling is how this fictional story about a so-called human baby farm,
Hmm.
it's taken from Reddit. It seems to mirror a real-life case in Georgia where Thai women were allegedly trafficked for their eggs.
Yeah, it's like straight out of a nightmare.
Mhm.
So today we're going deep into this disturbing world of human egg trafficking, trying to understand the motivations, the methods, and the potential fallout of this trade. We'll be looking at the limited news coverage, the unsettling parallels to that fictional Reddit story, and what this case might reveal about the darker side of the fertility industry.
Yeah, it's a story with a lot of unanswered questions, but I think
Mhm.
by piecing together the information that we have, we might be able to shed some light on this complex issue.
Okay, so let's start with that fictional story from the YouTube video. 100 women kept as slaves in human egg farm for egg harvesting. The story takes place in the Ozark Mountains, and it revolves around this young boy named Sam who moves to this isolated town.
Yeah, and the town is basically under the control of this Prescott family. Pretty sinister bunch. There's this constant, unnerving, metallic grinding sound that everyone just accepts as normal. But when Sam's sister disappears, things get really dark.
Right after years of searching, Sam and his friends discover this hidden facility up in the mountains where kidnapped girls are being held. It's not just about forced pregnancies, though, it's about exploitation on a whole other level.
Exactly, and you find out that the grinding noise everyone's been hearing is a meat grinder. Used to dispose of the women when they're no longer useful to the Prescotts. Pretty gruesome stuff. But what makes this even more disturbing is the revelation that the town's water supply is contaminated, making most of the residents infertile. And the Prescotts, who seem to control everything, are running this baby farm to profit from the desperation of families who want children.
Okay, so we've got this horrific fictional scenario, but then we get this real life case in Georgia with these striking similarities. It makes you wonder, does fiction sometimes tap into some kind of collective fear? I mean, this idea of losing control over reproduction, it's pretty primal, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it does. And the fact that this fictional story, which likely resonated with a lot of people, is mirrored in a real-life case makes it that much more disturbing. It makes you question how often fiction might be a reflection of deeper societal anxieties.
All right, so let's move on to the real life egg trade. You sent over some articles that provide a glimpse into how this industry works. But
Yeah.
before we get into the Georgia case, maybe we should break down the basics of egg donation for anyone who's not familiar with the process.
Sure. Egg donation involves a woman providing her eggs to another individual or couple who are unable to conceive naturally. It involves hormone injections to stimulate egg production, followed by a surgical procedure to retrieve the eggs.
Right. And the YouTube video really emphasizes the physical toll of this whole process. It describes the side effects of the hormones and the pain associated with the egg retrieval procedure. It's not exactly a walk in the park, is it?
Definitely not. And the video mentions a condition called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, or OHSS,
Yeah.
which can be a serious complication. It's definitely something that potential donors need to be fully aware of.
And then there's the financial aspect. You highlighted in your notes that compensation for egg donors varies wildly from a
Yeah.
few $1,000s to tens of thousands, depending on factors like education and ethnicity.
Yeah, it's a complex system, and it raises some important questions about who benefits from this market and whether it reinforces existing inequalities. Some argue that higher payouts for donors with certain characteristics are just a reflection of supply and demand, but others see it as problematic, potentially leading to a premium market for certain traits and raising ethical concerns about eugenics and accessibility. What are your thoughts?
It definitely makes you think about the potential for exploitation, especially when you consider the financial vulnerability of some donors. But before we get into that, let's dive into the heart of this episode, the Georgian egg farm. The sources you shared detail the experience of Miss Na, one of the Thai women who managed to escape.
Her account paints a pretty harrowing picture of the conditions they endured. Imagine being confined to a warehouse with dozens of other women under constant surveillance and facing threats if you try to leave.
And the deception involved is just appalling. They were lured there with promises of surrogacy jobs, only to find themselves trapped and forced into egg extraction.
Yeah, what's particularly disturbing is that their only options for escape were to pay a $22,000 ransom or submit to 3 months of forced egg extractions. It's a level of coercion that's just hard to fathom.
It's terrifying, but here's where things get even more complicated. We have these conflicting accounts about what actually happened in that warehouse.
That's right. The Thai women claim they were held against their will,
Mm.
but the Georgian authorities insist They found no evidence of wrongdoing, stating the women were there voluntarily for surrogacy and didn't complain about being captive.
Right, they even point to photos of newborns on the walls as proof of surrogacy, not egg donation.
Yeah.
But you pointed out a crucial detail in your notes. None of the Thai women spoke Georgian, and their only access to translators was through those potentially running the operation. That seemed like a pretty convenient way to silence them, wouldn't you say?
It certainly raises serious doubts about whether their voices were truly heard. This situation really highlights the imbalance of power and how language barriers can be used to control and manipulate vulnerable individuals.
So, how do we make sense of this conflicting information? Where do we even begin to unpack what really happened in that warehouse?
I think a good place to start is by looking at the different theories that have emerged online. Some are more plausible than others, but they all offer potential insights into what might have been going on.
Let's unpack some of those theories. What are some of the more plausible explanations that people have come up with?
Well, one theory is that the eggs were being sold to legitimate fertility clinics, but at a discounted price. This would make it a profitable business for the traffickers, while still providing clinics with a source of eggs, albeit unethically obtained.
Yeah, that makes sense considering how high the demand is and how expensive donor eggs can be. What other theories are out there?
Another theory suggests that the eggs were being sold to research facilities. Research facilities often operate with less public scrutiny and oversight compared to fertility clinics, which could make them a more appealing target for traffickers.
Right, if the eggs were used for research, it would be much harder to trace their origin and raise ethical concerns. It's a chilling thought that these women could have been exploited for scientific advancement without their knowledge or consent. What about some of the more outlandish theories?
Well, there are some theories that are more speculative and border on conspiracy. Some believe that the eggs were being used to create babies for sale on the black market, essentially a modern-day baby farm, like the one from the Reddit story.
That's a disturbing thought. Is there any evidence to support that theory?
Not really. It's mostly fueled by speculation and the fact that the case has so many unanswered questions. Another theory suggests the involvement of corrupt government officials who turned a blind eye to the operation or even facilitated it.
It feels like we're dealing with layers upon layers of secrecy and potential corruption. It's hard to know what to believe.
It is. The lack of transparency and conflicting information makes it difficult to determine the truth. But it's important for us to think critically about the available evidence and consider the various possibilities.
We've been focusing on the potential consequences for the industry as a whole, but I keep thinking about the women who were trapped in that warehouse. If their accounts are accurate, the physical and emotional consequences for them could be devastating.
Absolutely. We've already discussed the potential physical risks of repeated egg extractions, including OHSS, which can be life-threatening. There's also the risk of long-term damage to their reproductive health, potentially affecting their ability to have children in the future.
Right, and we can't forget about the psychological impact. These women were deceived, held against their will, and subjected to invasive medical procedures without their consent. The trauma they've endured is unimaginable.
Trauma like that can manifest in many ways: PTSD, anxiety, depression, and a deep mistrust of others. The long-term consequences for their mental and emotional well-being could be profound.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about the lasting impact this experience will likely have on their lives. Shifting gears a bit, what are the potential legal ramifications of this case? Could this lead to greater scrutiny and calls for tighter regulation within the fertility industry?
It's certainly possible. This case has shown a light on the potential for exploitation and abuse within the industry. If the investigation confirms the allegations made by the Thai women, it could trigger a public outcry and force governments to reevaluate existing policies.
You mentioned that surrogacy is legal in Georgia, which might have made it easier for this operation to fly under the radar. Do you think this case could lead to changes in their surrogacy laws?
It's definitely possible. This case exposes the vulnerabilities of countries with less stringent regulations. They can become havens for those seeking to exploit these systems for profit.
It's a stark reminder that the legality and ethical considerations surrounding surrogacy vary widely across the globe. It makes you wonder if similar operations are happening in other parts of the world where oversight is even weaker.
It's a chilling thought, but a realistic one. The global demand for donor eggs creates a market where traffickers can prey on vulnerable women, particularly in countries where corruption is rampant or law enforcement is weak.
So given the complexity of this issue and the global nature of these operations, what can be done to prevent these kinds of abuses? How do we protect potential victims and promote ethical practices within the industry?
Well, there are several key areas where action is needed. Firstly, we need stronger international collaboration to crack down on trafficking networks. Sharing intelligence, coordinating law enforcement efforts, and harmonizing regulations across borders is crucial.
That makes sense. Traffickers often operate across international lines, making it difficult to track and prosecute them. It's like a hydra. You cut off one head and two more grow back.
Exactly. We need a coordinated global response to effectively disrupt these networks. Secondly, stricter regulations and greater oversight of the fertility industry are essential. This includes ensuring informed consent, protecting donor anonymity, and preventing the commodification of human eggs. We need to address the loopholes that allow for exploitation and prioritize the well-being of donors.
I remember reading in one of your articles that some clinics offer significantly higher compensation for donors with specific characteristics like high IQs or certain ethnicities. Where do we draw the line between supply and demand and the ethical concerns surrounding eugenics?
That's a complex question with no easy answers. Some argue that offering higher compensation for certain trades is simply a reflection of market forces, while others see it as a slippery slope towards eugenics, reinforcing the idea that some traits are inherently more desirable than others. We need open and honest conversations about where we draw the line.
Yeah, it's crucial to ensure that access to fertility treatments isn't determined by socioeconomic status or based on discriminatory preferences. What other steps can be taken to protect potential victims?
Well, addressing the root causes of exploitation is crucial. Poverty, lack of education, and limited opportunities often make women vulnerable to these types of schemes. Empowering women, providing them with education and viable economic alternatives, can help reduce their susceptibility to trafficking.
So it's about creating a world where women have choices and aren't forced into these situations out of desperation.
Exactly. We also need to raise awareness about the risks of egg trafficking so that women are informed and can make safe choices. Organizations like the Pavina Foundation in Thailand, which played a key role in rescuing the 3 women in this case, are doing incredible work.
Their work is vital, but it highlights the need for greater support for organizations like theirs. They need more resources to expand their reach and provide assistance to victims of trafficking.
Absolutely. Their efforts demonstrate the power of intervention and support in combating this issue.
Let's move on to the role of technology in all of this. Technology has undoubtedly revolutionized the fertility industry, but it also presents new challenges and ethical dilemmas.
You're right. Technology has enabled procedures like IVF and egg freezing, giving hope to countless individuals and couples struggling with infertility. But it's also made the process of finding egg donors increasingly impersonal. You mentioned the YouTube video touched on the use of apps for this purpose. It seems like a very transactional and consumeristic approach to something as sensitive as reproduction.
It does. And it raises concerns about the commodification of human eggs and the potential for exploitation, particularly when these apps operate in countries with lax regulations.
The lack of personal interaction and the ease with which these transactions can occur raise serious ethical questions about informed consent, donor anonymity, and the potential for coercion.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the future of reproductive technology. With advancements in genetic engineering and the possibility of artificial wombs, what new ethical dilemmas might we face in the years to come?
That's a crucial question. As technology continues to advance, we need to engage in open and honest conversations about the ethical implications of these developments. We need to ensure that scientific progress doesn't come at the expense of human rights and dignity.
So it's about establishing ethical frameworks and guidelines to govern the development and use of these technologies. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
Absolutely. We need to anticipate potential issues and address them before they become widespread problems. This is a responsibility we all share.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's still so much to unpack.
Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've discussed and come back for the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore some potential solutions and leave you with some thought-provoking questions to consider.
Yeah, it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by the sheer scale of this whole issue. I mean, we've been talking about human trafficking, exploitation, ethical dilemmas surrounding reproductive technology. It feels like we're uncovering layers upon layers of complexity.
Yeah, it is a lot to process, but I think acknowledging that complexity is the first step towards finding solutions. We can't solve a problem we don't fully understand.
So let's shift our focus to solutions. I mean, we've talked about the problems, but what concrete actions can be taken to create a more ethical and just system for everyone involved?
Well, I think transparency and accountability within the fertility industry are paramount. We need clear, enforceable regulations to ensure informed consent from donors, protect their anonymity, and prevent the commodification of human eggs.
Yeah, one of the articles you shared mentioned that some donors feel pressured to downplay the number of cycles they've undergone just to be accepted by clinics. That seems incredibly dangerous, and it highlights a real lack of oversight.
It does. We need to create mechanisms to track egg retrievals across clinics, both domestically and internationally, to prevent overdonation and safeguard the health of donors. This information should be accessible and transparent to everyone involved.
We've talked a lot about the vulnerable women who are exploited for their eggs. But what about the individuals and couples seeking donor eggs? What role can they play in promoting ethical practices?
Well, intended parents have a significant role to play. They need to be informed consumers. Asking questions about donor compensation screening processes and the clinic's commitment to ethical sourcing is crucial. Choosing clinics that prioritize transparency and align with their ethical values can drive positive change within the industry.
So it's about being a conscious consumer and using your purchasing power to support ethical practices. But it goes beyond just individual choices, right?
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
also about advocating for systemic change. Intended parents can join advocacy groups, lobby for stricter regulations, and use their platforms to raise awareness about these issues.
What about the role of governments and international organizations? I mean, they have a responsibility to address this issue on a global scale.
They absolutely do. Governments need to strengthen laws and enforcement mechanisms against human trafficking, particularly when it involves organ and tissue removal. Allocating resources to identify and support victims is crucial, as is providing them with legal protection and access to health care.
And this case really highlights how traffickers exploit legal loopholes and operate across borders. It seems like international cooperation is key to combating this.
You're right. Sharing intelligence, coordinating investigations, and harmonizing regulations across borders are essential to disrupt these trafficking networks effectively. We need a united front to tackle this global problem.
And the YouTube video pointed out that the U.S. State Department's Trafficking in Persons report ranked Georgia as a Tier 1 country, meaning they're supposedly making significant efforts to combat human trafficking. But this case suggests there are still gaps in the system, even in countries with seemingly good track records.
It's a reminder that constant vigilance is needed. Traffickers are constantly adapting their methods and finding new ways to exploit vulnerable individuals. We can't afford to become complacent.
So what's the key takeaway for our listeners today? What can they do to make a difference?
Well, this case, as disturbing as it is a wake-up call. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that slavery and exploitation still exist, often hidden in plain sight. We all have a role to play in combating these injustices.
Yeah, we can't turn a blind eye to these issues, whether it's making informed choices as consumers, supporting organizations, fighting trafficking, or advocating for policy changes. Each action can contribute to a more just and ethical world.
Exactly. Awareness is the first step, but action is what creates lasting change.
And one of the most unsettling aspects of this whole case is the lack of clear answers. What happened to the rest of the women in that warehouse? Are similar operations happening elsewhere? These questions linger.
They do, and it underscores the importance of continuing to investigate, expose, and hold those responsible accountable. We need to keep asking these difficult questions and demand answers.
As technology continues to advance and reshape our world, it's crucial to ensure that those advancements don't come at the expense of human dignity and fundamental rights.
That's a powerful and essential thought to keep in mind. Technology should serve humanity, not exploit it. We need to be mindful of the potential consequences of every advancement and prioritize ethical considerations in every step of development and implementation.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening, albeit unsettling. Thank you for guiding us through this complex and important issue.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah.
I hope this conversation has sparked some critical thinking and inspired our listeners to take action.
We encourage everyone to learn more about the ethical implications of the fertility industry and the fight against human trafficking. We'll be sure to include links to relevant resources like the Pavina Foundation in the show notes.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay